Okay, so imagine waking up in the morning. You roll out of bed, you grab your stuff, and instead of walking out your front door, you climb up a ladder through a hole in your ceiling. You step out onto your roof, and then you just walk across your neighbor's roof, and their neighbor's roof, and the neighbor after that. Because that's the street. The roof is the street. There are no alleys down below, no paths between houses, no front doors facing outward. Just a solid mass of mud brick buildings pressed so tightly together that the only way to get anywhere is to walk on top of everything. That's not a dystopian novel. That's not a weird art project. That is literally how 9,000 people lived. 9,000 people in one place, 9,000 years ago, in what is now central Turkey, in a city called Çatalhöyük. And nobody built it by accident. Nobody stumbled into this arrangement. They chose it. Generation after generation, for over 1,000 years, people were born into this place, lived in it, had kids in it, died in it, and never once decided to move the doors to the side of the building. Why? That's the question. And the answer is one of the strangest, most fascinating rabbit holes in all of human prehistory. So let's go. First, let's set the scene, because context matters here. We're talking roughly 7,500 BCE. That's about 5,500 years before the pyramids at Giza. 3,000 years before Stonehenge gets its big stones. This is early. Genuinely, startlingly early. Humanity has only just figured out farming. And even then, not everywhere, not confidently. Most people on Earth at this point are still living in small bands of maybe 30, 50 people, moving with the seasons, following animals, picking berries, sleeping in shelters they'll abandon in 2 weeks and never think about again. Therefore, Çatalhöyük is a shock. Because here's this place, this massive, dense, tightly packed settlement on the Konya Plain in Anatolia, already housing thousands of people simultaneously. Archaeologists call it a mega-village, which is a term that sounds impressive until you realize what it actually means. It means the people who study ancient settlements looked at Çatalhöyük and went, "We don't have a word for this." They had to invent a new category. It's too big to be a village. But it doesn't quite fit the model of what we call a city either. No central temple dominating the skyline, no palace complex, no obvious ruling class sitting in bigger buildings eating better food. But then it's not a village either, because villages don't house 9,000 people across 13 hectares of mud brick architecture that took coordinated effort across generations to build and maintain. It just exists, on its own terms, in a category by itself. The site was first excavated in the 1960s by a British archaeologist named James Millart. Millart was blown away. He found murals, sculptures, evidence of ritual practice unlike anything from that era. He made bold claims, got caught up in a scandal involving allegedly forged documents, and the site spent a few decades in academic limbo. Too important to ignore, too messy to fully embrace. But then, in the 1990s, a new team came in, led by Ian Hodder from Stanford. Better technology, better methodology, better questions. They dug more carefully. They recorded more precisely. And what they found, layer by layer, house by house, bone by bone, made the original discoveries look like just the opening sentence of a much longer, stranger story. Let's talk about the buildings, because this is where it gets genuinely weird. Every house in Çatalhöyük is a rectangle, roughly 10 by 6 meters. Mud brick walls, timber beams, plaster floors. Simple, functional. But they are packed together like cells in a honeycomb, sharing walls, touching on every side, with no gaps between them. No alleys, no courtyards, no breathing room. Just house touching house in every direction. Therefore, no doors on the sides, no windows facing outward. The only way in and out is through the roof. A wooden ladder leads down through a hole in the ceiling, usually positioned directly above the hearth, which means every time you come home, You descend into your house through the smoke of your own fire. Every morning you climb up through it to leave. Now here's the zigzag of this. That seems insane, but then it's also kind of brilliant. Think about it from a defense perspective. No ground-level entrances means nothing to breach. You can't batter down a door that doesn't exist. You can't sneak through an alley that isn't there. The roofscape itself becomes your wall. But then the defense theory only goes so far. The evidence doesn't suggest Çatalhöyük was under constant siege. No mass trauma in the bones. No repeated violent conflict signatures. So the deeper theory is social. And this one's more interesting. When you live in a place with no streets, when movement itself is communal and visible, when you literally have to walk across your neighbor's rooftops to get anywhere, you are in constant, unavoidable proximity to everyone around you. You can't slip away unnoticed. There is no shadow to disappear into. You are, at almost all times, visible to someone. And maybe that's not a bug. Maybe it's the feature. Maybe the architecture is encoding a value. We are together, always. That's not an accident. That's a choice. Now look inside the houses, because here's where it gets even more specific. Every house has the same internal layout, almost exactly the same. A raised platform on the north side, elevated, plastered, kept noticeably cleaner, used for sleeping and important activities. A cooking area near the entrance ladder, a storage area. The proportions are almost identical across hundreds of excavated houses, which means when you walked into your neighbor's home, you already knew where everything was. The floor plan was standardized across an entire civilization for 2,000 years without a single written code requiring it. And crucially, no hierarchy of space. No grand house for the chief and a hovel for the servant. Every house, the same. The architecture is saying something. It's saying, we are the same, all of us. Okay, this is the part I genuinely cannot get out of my head. The people of Çatalhöyük buried their dead under their floors, under the sleeping platform, literally beneath the exact spot where they slept every single night. Not in a cemetery, not outside the settlement, under the house, under your house, under your sleeping platform. Sometimes the bones of multiple generations stacked directly beneath the place where the living close their eyes. And when archaeologists analyze those bones, isotope analysis, ancient DNA, every modern tool available, they found something that completely reframed the social structure. The people buried under a house were not always the biological family of the people living above them. In many cases, they weren't related at all. Therefore, what does that mean? It means family in Çatalhöyük was not primarily defined by blood. It was defined by house. The house was the unit of identity. The house was the lineage. You belong to the people who belong to this structure, past, present, and future, regardless of whether you shared their DNA. Your ancestors weren't the people you were genetically descended from. Your ancestors were the people who had lived in this same building before you. That is a completely different conception of what it means to be a family, and it has enormous implications for how we understand social bonds and belonging in this community. But then there's more. Some of the skulls were removed after burial. The body would be interred, it would decompose, and someone would come back, reopen the burial, and carefully extract the skull. Those skulls turn up coated in fine plaster, modeled to recreate facial features, with shell inlays for eyes, handled repeatedly, moved between buildings. Your ancestor's face, preserved in plaster, kept present in your home. This is not macabre for the sake of it. This is a community actively, deliberately managing its relationship with death, building it into the architecture of daily life, refusing to push mortality to the margins. At Çatalhöyük, death lives with you, literally, under your feet every single night. And that required intention, a shared cultural agreement that this was right, that this was the correct way to carry the people who came before. Let's talk about what's on the walls. The most famous is the vulture mural, A scene painted in red and black showing enormous vultures, depicted with human legs, surrounding headless human figures being picked apart by the birds. Vivid, visceral, deeply strange to modern eyes. And it has generated a spectacular amount of academic argument. One leading theory, excarnation, the practice of exposing a body to vultures before burial, letting them strip the flesh from the bones. This was a real funerary practice in parts of the ancient world. The vulture mural might be a representation of that ritual, not a horror image, a sacred one. The moment when the dead are given to the sky before their bones come home. But then there are the hunting murals, images of deer, aurochs, leopards, and humans interacting with them in dense, layered compositions. And here's the thing, these murals weren't permanent. They were painted, then plastered over, then painted again, sometimes dozens of layers deep. The act of replastering may have been as meaningful as the image itself, a periodic renewal of the house, a way of marking time that has nothing to do with calendars and everything to do with cycles. And then the figurines, hundreds of them, mostly animals, bears, boars, foxes, bulls, but also human figures. And the most famous is a substantial clay figure of a large woman, seated, hands resting on the heads of two feline animals on either side of her. She is often called the Mother Goddess, a term that has become enormous, especially in spiritual communities who see Çatalhöyük as evidence of an ancient matriarchal civilization. But then, the actual archaeology is messier than that. The figure was found in a grain bin, which could mean it was safely stored because of its sacred importance, or it could mean it was old and someone shoved it somewhere. We don't know. Ian Hodder has been consistently cautious about the goddess interpretation, pointing out that most figurines are animals, not female humans, and that projecting a coherent goddess religion onto the site says more about what we want to find than what the evidence clearly shows. That tension between the desire for a clean narrative and the stubborn ambiguity of the archaeological record is one of the most genuinely interesting things about Çatalhöyük. It functions like a mirror. Different people see different things reflected back, which itself tells you something about us as much as about the site. Let's come down from the big questions for a second and just feel what an ordinary Tuesday was like. You wake up before dawn. You're burning through lamp oil, and that stuff matters. Your sleeping platform is raised, plaster smooth, kept as clean as you can manage. Beneath you, somewhere under that surface, are the bones of people who slept here before you. You don't find that creepy, it's just where they are, where they're supposed to be. You climb up your ladder, out through the roof hole. The morning air on the Konya Plain hits you. Cold in winter, this is a semi-arid continental climate that doesn't forgive being underprepared. But then the view from the roof at dawn is something. Thousands of flat rooftops stretching in every direction. Smoke rising from the hearths below as other households wake up. People beginning to move across the roofscape. Neighbors you know by name, by the sound of their laugh, by the rhythm of how they walk. There is no anonymous crowd here. Everyone knows everyone. Çatalhöyük sat near the Çarşamba River, and the surrounding wetlands were genuinely rich. Hunting was a major part of the food supply alongside farming, and the hunting here wasn't small game. Aurochs, the wild ancestor of domestic cattle, nearly 2 meters at the shoulder, with a temperament to match, were hunted regularly. The bones show it. The murals show it. The horns mounted on the walls of houses show it. Bringing down an aurochs, an animal that could kill you, that outweighed you several times over, with horns that could disembowel a person, was not casual. It was dangerous, collective, and wrapped in meaning. The horns in the house might be a declaration, might be protection, might be a way of keeping the power of that animal inside the home. And the farming, wheat, barley, lentils, evidence of orchards. The landscape around Çatalhöyük was actively managed. Not just wild land being extracted from, but a worked, known, tended environment. These people understood the land the way a chef understands their kitchen. Therefore, think about the logistics. 9,000 people. That is a lot of mouths, a lot of waste, a lot of fire smoke in a tight area. The midden heaps show extraordinary concentrations of organic material: dung, food waste, ash. The smell of this place would have been intense. You were in constant sensory contact with thousands of other humans and their animals. And yet people kept coming. For 2,000 years. Generation after generation chose to be born here, live here, die here. That's not an accident. That's a choice. Repeatedly, collectively, deliberately made. One of the most striking things the modern excavations revealed, and this genuinely surprised researchers, is the evidence for relative equality. House sizes are consistent. Grave goods are broadly similar across most of the population. Men and women show similar bone isotope signatures, meaning similar diets, similar access to food, including high-status hunted protein. Skeletal wear patterns are similar across sexes, suggesting labor wasn't sharply divided the way we see in most later complex societies. No palace. No temple complex controlled by priests who eat better than everyone else. No warrior elite with bigger houses and fancier burials. Just thousands of households, roughly the same size, organized in the same way, living at the same density. But then, how? How does a community of 9,000 people sustain itself without chiefs, without a king, without a bureaucracy? Because every early city we point to as a model, Uruk, Mohenjo-Daro, has hierarchy baked visibly into its bones. Monumentality as political statement. A palace that says, this person's comfort matters more than yours. Çatalhöyük has none of that, and it lasted longer than most of those cities did. Some researchers propose that the house itself was the organizing unit of political life, that decisions were made at the household level, negotiated between households, with no mechanism for one person to accumulate enough power to dominate the others. There is no public square in Çatalhöyük where a leader could address the crowd. No elevated platform. No space designed to make one person feel above many. Just the rooftop, where everyone stands at the same height. Therefore, maybe equality wasn't an ideology at Çatalhöyük. Maybe it was an architecture. Built into the walls, the floor plans, the roofscapes, so that the physical reality of daily life continuously reinforced it, without anyone needing to police it. The built environment was the law. Çatalhöyük lasted from roughly 7,500 BCE to about 5,700 BCE, nearly 2,000 years of continuous occupation. That's longer than the Roman Empire, longer than Christianity has existed. By any measure, what they were doing worked. And then, it didn't. Around 5,700 BCE, the settlement thins, the population drops, fires go out in house after house, and eventually the great mega-village, the city with no streets, the rooftop civilization, goes quiet. A smaller settlement continues on the nearby West Mound for a while, but then that too fades, and the mounds settle into the earth of the Konya Plain and wait 9,000 years for someone to dig them up. Why did it end? We don't fully know. Climate change is one serious hypothesis, the region drying out, the rich wetlands shrinking. Another theory involves the very success of the place. Once the agricultural techniques developed at Çatalhöyük matured, smaller dispersed communities became viable, and the logistical burden of maintaining this density stopped being worth it. But then, here's what doesn't end. The legacy. The people who left Çatalhöyük scattered into Anatolia, into Europe, carried by the great Neolithic migration of farmers moving westward across a continent, bringing agriculture, pottery, new techniques of building and organizing and thinking about death, all the way from central Turkey to the Atlantic coast. The ideas incubated in that rooftop city didn't die with the city. They dispersed, transformed, resurfaced in different forms in different places, but they were not lost. Here's the thing I keep coming back to with Çatalhöyük. We have this instinct. It's baked into how history gets taught, to see ancient people as somehow less sophisticated, less emotionally complex, less capable of the kinds of social, spiritual, political lives we think of as distinctly modern. Like consciousness itself has been on a slow upward trajectory, and people 9,000 years ago were just earlier, simpler versions of us. And then you look at a place like this, a community that held together for 2,000 years, that buried their dead with such deliberate care they kept ancestors present, literally present, beneath them, every night. That painted the same walls over and over in ritual renewal across dozens of generations. That built a city so structurally egalitarian that 9,000 people lived at medieval urban densities, without a king, without a police force, without a written law, without any of the coercive machinery we're told is the minimum requirement for civilization to hold together. And you have to ask, what did they know that we don't? Not mystically, practically. How did 9,000 people live on each other's rooftops for 2,000 years and make it work? What agreements, unwritten, unspoken, encoded in the architecture and ritual and the way you buried your dead, kept that community coherent across 80 generations? We don't have complete answers. But if they figured it out once, if 9,000 people really did sustain something relatively egalitarian and rooted and cosmologically rich for 2,000 years, then the argument that hierarchy is just human nature starts to look a lot thinner. Maybe the answer isn't that humans can't build something more communal. Maybe the answer is just that we forgot what it looked like. Çatalhöyük is buried now, a mound in a field in Turkey. But it was real. The ladders were real. The vultures on the wall were real. The plastered skulls with shell eyes were real. The sleeping platforms above the bones of the beloved dead were real. And 9,000 people climbed up through their own hearth smoke every single morning, stepped onto the rooftop, and walked across their neighbors' houses to wherever they needed to go. And for 2,000 years, they thought that was just completely normal. Which honestly, I find kind of beautiful.